Hello, it's me. Welcome back to another video. Today we're chatting about 5 fiction books that have literally changed my life and I think you need to read before 2024 is up. Now, actually, let's just get one thing straight, which is that the one series that has genuinely changed my entire life is Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series. If you can see my collection back there, I have a little snitch too. That is one series that has completely changed my life. I am known as a Harry Potter weirdo in my circle of family and friends, and I own it with pride. So, just for obvious reasons, we won't be talking about the Harry Potter book because then this video would never end. And everybody knows that Harry Potter is the gold standard for books that change your life. So just know that if that is the number one series that I recommend to everybody all the time, no matter your age or where you come from and all of that. But I wanted to talk about 5 books outside of that have come out in the recent years, more or less, and they're all fiction books, and they are genuinely incredible books, incredible authors, and I genuinely think that everybody should read them if you haven't already. As I was planning for this video, I was thinking, how do I assess books? How do I assess for which books have really changed my life? I enjoy reading. I read a lot of books, and there's a lot of books that I love and that I recommend. And, when we say life-changing, there has to be an additional layer of enjoyment and fulfillment to that book. So one of the questions I asked myself was, which books do I think about almost on a daily basis? Which books live rent-free in my head all the time? Which books do I recommend to folks all the time, regardless of what they like and what they don't like? And as I asked myself these questions, and I was, browsing my bookshelf, and I was going through my list of books that I had read, these 5 books really came to mind. Some of them you may have heard of. I've talked a lot about on this channel. Some you may not have. But let's get started with the first one. All right, so in no particular order, the first book that I have is The Brilliant Life of Udora Honeysett by Annie Lyons. I have talked about this book quite a bit on this channel. This was so heartwarming. Everybody I have recommended this to has actually come back and said just how incredibly gut-wrenching but heartwarming it really was. This book is about our main character, Udora Honeysett, who is 85 years old, I believe. She's living alone and she's really just had it. Okay, so she is at the end of her life and she's decided, there's nothing else left to live for, until a young 10-year-old girl named Rose moves in next door or on the same street, and they become unlikely companions and friends. This is a grumpy sunshine book, not in a romantical sense, but just, you have our characters really on the opposite ends. You have Udora, who is this grumpy older lady. She's done it all, she's seen it all, and now she's ready to move on. And then you have Rose, who's really at the beginning of her life, and she's so curious and filled with life about everything, and an unlikely coming together of these 2 really endearing characters. Udora, in a sense, really gets to live her own life and her own childhood as she befriends Rose. So there is a bit of a jumping, sort of a timeline, but this relationship really rekindles joy and love again for life for Udora. There's 2 main reasons why I thought this book for me was life-changing. One, this was one of the first times I had read an octogenarian as being a main character in a book, and that perspective was something that was a total it was a total literary blind spot for me. It was not something I was used to reading, and it really opened my eyes. So it was life-changing for me in that sense. And this was such a unique friendship between 2 just unlikely folks that it really made me want to explore the subgenre of friendships that's in fiction a lot more. It's written really well. It's really fast paced. There's an element of mystery in here too. It's gonna make you laugh, it's gonna make you cry, and you're not gonna want to put this book down. And that's how I felt when I read this book. And after, this is a book that I think about all the time. This really is a beautiful story between an older woman who is just ready to embrace death and a young 10-year-old girl who teaches her about life and what it is to live life. And I think everybody needs to read this book. All right, next book that I have on here is not a surprise, but it's Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This is another book that I have talked about a lot. And I think about this book a lot, almost every single day. If you haven't somehow heard about Yellowface, let me tell you, this is a thriller / a literary fiction by R.F. Kuang. It came out last year. It's really like an entry into these two genres for her as an author. And this is set around two main characters. And none of this is going to be a spoiler, okay? Like, it's literally all on the back here. But we have June Hayward and Athena Liu. These are friends. They went to like a fine arts program together, and they're both budding authors, except Athena, who identifies as Chinese American, has really skyrocketed to fame. Her books just really speak to the diaspora. Her books are just like a cultural phenomenon. And June, being a human, is quite jealous of that progress, but they are still friends. Until one day when they're celebrating Athena's recent book launch, or one of her books that got turned into a movies, and Athena basically chokes and dies in front of June. Again, not a spoiler, it is on the jacket here. Our story really starts from when June, after seeing Athena die in front of her, decides to steal her unfinished manuscript about the Chinese labor camps in the 1800s. Not only that, June also changes her last name to Song, from Hayward to Song, to be more racially ambiguous and to really sort of manipulate the publication industry and also the folks, the readers, into thinking that she has some sort of racial and cultural identity with the Chinese population. So as you can imagine from there, this book just unravels. You really get to see it's all from the perspective of June, who is, I guess, the villain in this story, an extremely unlovable character, a very flawed human character, but really, really unlovable. And this is the book that you will binge in one day. Two things that really made me categorize this as a life-changing book. One, just the story, the R.F. Kuang's ability to tell this super racially complex, social justice oriented gem of a book in a way that is so bingeable was phenomenal to me. Okay, this is not a book that's going to be a drag. You just binge this because the way that it's told. And R.F. Kuang, it really seems like at points she just went at it. She just kept typing and went at it, and the editor was like, you know what, that's raw emotion, we're going to keep it in here. Some people had a problem with it. Some people found her a little bit redundant. I certainly didn't. This is a fictional story, but it's really kind of layered with the very, very real, very, very non-fictional reality for a lot of minority folks, whether they are in the publishing industry or anywhere else really outside of that. Like what it's like to be colored people's stories stolen and retold and manipulated and sold for profit. That's the essence that this book captures. Just a sense of social inequity and social injustice is what this is really about, while at the same time just really painting this really flawed system, right, of publication industry. It's interesting. Everybody hates the main character, June, and I mean, she's not exactly lovable, but this book is so much more than just this one woman who's made really, really bad choices. It's about the system that allows these choices to happen, and not only allows them, but also rewards them. And I really saw R.F. Kuang's portrayal of the publication world really just as this larger, kind of as a way to really just capture the larger society that we live in, the larger capitalistic society that we live in. And I really saw that being reflected in her portrayal of the publication industry. This book is so good. I think about it every day. I recommend to everybody, if you haven't read it, read it. The third book that's on this list of life-changing books for me is The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi. Now, this was a great book. Okay, the entire series was not necessarily my favorite. The first book was great. I heard Netflix bought the rights to turn this into a movie or a TV show. I'm still waiting for that to come around, but this was incredible. If you're not familiar with the story, The Henna Artist is set in 1960s Jaipur in India, and it follows a young female protagonist, Lakshmi, who is a 16-year-old who basically runs away from an abusive marriage, and she comes to the big city to make a name of her own as a henna artist. she finds herself now being employed by, like the creme de la creme of Jaipur society, whether it's the royals or whatnot, and she starts to make her own way into the world. Now, it's not the most, I guess, like unique sort of a story, but two reasons why I thought this was life-changing for me was, number one, this book really made me reconnect with South Asian stories. Okay. I admit I was not reading too many South Asian stories before then because I just didn't feel called to them. And the way that this story is told, it's so endearing. It's so, so powerful. It really, really made me fall in love with stories of South Asian women and seeing South Asian women as dynamic, as powerful, and not as meek and docile, which is often what we're told they are. The second reason it was life-changing for me is more of an extension of the first point, which is that this is such a beautiful South Asian origin story of a woman who really wants to make her own way in the world independently. And she comes from really, really humble roots. And so the portrayal of culture in here was really lovely. Often when we read more like cultural books, there's a very sort of black and white, all or nothing type of narrative where either the culture is portrayed in like a really good way or a really bad way. I found Alka Joshi captured the complexity of the cultural nuances of being a brown woman, especially at that time. And she's, like an unmarried, self-employed brown woman. And the complexity was captured so well. I also found Lakshmi just so inspiring as a character. She's one of my favorite female characters of all time. And what was so life-changing for me about that was it was just so refreshing to see a South Asian main character really at the forefront of the story as opposed to being a side supporter. It's really just about her, and there's a great cast of characters that support her, but really it's about her. I loved it. Having said that, there were some, I didn't think the writing was the best, but I mean, I'm, no author. I don't have a master's in fine arts. I don't read books for prose. I read them for their storytelling ability, for their ability to capture my attention, and for a true and complex portrayal. In a similar vein, the fourth book that I have on this list is KK by Vaishnavi Patel. Now, you've probably heard about this book all over YouTube. I hope you have. This is a big one. It's going to hurt my wrist after a while to hold it up, so I'm just going to hold it up with two hands. But KK is a book I have spoken a lot about. This came out last year. This is a Hindu mythological retelling of a woman named KK in the epic Mahabharata, where she was really portrayed, in the epic Ramayana, where she's portrayed as a villain. But this is the retelling from her perspective, and it follows her entire life. There is a bit of magical realism in here as well. And, as you can imagine, this was so life-changing for me because I love mythical retellings. And I have never read a retelling so captivating. I have read a few other retellings of women from Ramayana or Mahabharata, some of the other Hindu epics, but the way that KK was told, it is such an awesome, awesome feminist retelling. This was life-changing for me for two main reasons. One reason, so this was life-changing for me mainly because this book really, really makes you challenge your own notions and nuances about women who had to make difficult choices, about women who think about themselves, because let's face it, often women who think about themselves in a lot of minority cultures, but especially South Asian cultures, are labeled as selfish. And so here you have the OG selfish woman who made decisions that she was misunderstood for and labeled as a villain. And it's really such a redeeming story. So, if she could write her own story of what she would write, and I think it would be pretty close to Vaishnavi Patel's reimagining. If you like feminist fiction, you would actually really, really love this. I will not lie. There were times where I had to really put this book down. So, I also really enjoyed this book because it felt challenging in some ways for me. It really challenged for me, within me, what I thought about women and what I've thought and known about some of these figures in the cultural and religious history. And I had to put the book down a few times, and it really made me think what is this discomfort about for me? A lot of the times it felt little blasphemous, if I'm not gonna lie, to be reading this, because it has certain elements of religion in it and some religious figures in it who are, you know, you're being taught to question a little bit. And that really made me feel icky. And that's when you know that's a really, really good book, when it pushes you outside of your comfort zone. And in that sense, it was so life-changing for me because it really got me interested back into a lot of my cultural and religious roots. I am not particularly a super religious person, but this really got me back into the stories of like my own cultural and religious heritage from a place of curiosity, and made me feel a lot more inquisitive about stories of my people and where I come from. Again, having said that, like, was it perfectly written? No. I had a couple chapters in there were absolutely useless. I was like, why is this here? It doesn't make sense. The writing was too simplistic at some point. So again, I don't read books for prose. I don't read books for, you know, how like literary and complex they are. I read them for good storytelling and their ability to evoke some emotion in me. And this certainly did that. Okay, and the last book on this list is Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. This baby has not graced this channel, okay? So let me tell you about this book that I tell everybody about, and I don't know why I haven't brought it up on this channel. You may be familiar with Margaret Atwood. She's known to write the epic masterpiece, The Handmaid's Tale, which is a great TV show as well. Amazing book. But if you ask me to pick my favorite Margaret Atwood, it would be Alias Grace. This is one of her lesser well-known but equally incredible books. And it's a chunky one. This is essentially a murder mystery. Oh, and if you like true crime, this is based on the true story of a woman named Grace Marks. So, what's even better is that this is a true crime story from Southern Ontario, from Kingston, and in Canada. And you can look it up. It's a true story, but it's basically a whole retelling from the perspective of Grace Marks that Margaret Atwood reimagined. She's one of like the most like notorious villainesses in the history of like modern criminal history. Starts off the time when Grace Marks was actually alive, which was mid 1800s in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. This follows the story of Grace. She is basically a maid. She's working in a rich person's home until one day she's arrested for the murder of the rich man and his mistress. And she's sent to the Kingston Penitentiary. I have been to that penitentiary. It was very cool learning more about Grace Marks there. So it follows Grace as she's recounting the story of what happened in her history and her growing up, and the psychiatrist Dr. Simon Jordan. Grace says that she can't remember what happened the day that her employer was murdered and his mistress was murdered. And so the whole book is essentially this conversation between Dr. Simon Jordan, you know, helping her recount her immigration from Ireland to Canada as a young girl and how she got into service and what was that like, and getting to the day that she supposedly doesn't remember. Now, I'll be honest with you, this book is like almost 500 pages, but it was so worth it. I read it a few years ago. I've actually read it twice, and I've watched the show on Netflix too. So good. This book was life-changing for me because it really got me into true crime. Okay, I like murder mysteries, but this is like the OG and one of the most popular murders in Canada, and this really, really got me into that genre. And it's just so beautifully told. Like, again, Margaret Atwood has such a good way of just placing women at the front and center of a book. In The Handmaid's Tale, there's an element of women being victimized, and in here there's a woman being villainized, and just unpacking women's stories. Margaret Atwood wrote this in the mid-90s, so it's not particularly famous on Book Talk now because for some reason, like BookTube, we are obsessed with new books, but this was so life-changing for me. Like, this book, it really made me get into true crime. It really made me want to read women's stories more, where women are front and center. And it was just chef's kiss. Okay, this book was incredible. All right, I'm gonna put that down. My hand really hurts. Those are some, last couple books were heavy and my wrists hurt, but those are the 5 books that I genuinely think changed my life and I think everybody should read. This was the fiction version. Let me know if you want a nonfiction version of this video, because I have some really great nonfiction that I've read and I will deliver. Let me know if there's any of these that you haven't read. A lot of them you might have, and which one you're going to be picking up. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It really helps me out, and give this video a like, and I will see you soon.